Welcome back to Redefining AI, the Tech Podcast. On behalf of Squirro, the Enterprise Gen AI platform, I'm your host, Lauren Hawker-Zaffer. Now, today we're thrilled to welcome Clara Hawking, a visible voice at the intersection of AI, ethics, and education. Clara is the head of artificial intelligence at Globe Educate, where she leads the integration of AI technologies into educational systems with a focus on ethics, teacher training, and prepping the next generation for the future of technology. Her academic background is as impressive as it is multidisciplinary. 3 master's degrees, PhD level coursework in political philosophy and psychology, and a current pursuit of a master's in cybersecurity. She's a leader in AI governance, compliance, and risk management, helping organizations turn regulations into opportunities while safeguarding human values. Now, beyond her professional achievements, Clara is deeply committed to AI education and protecting children in the digital age. Through her work, she advocates for responsible AI systems that really do prioritize safety, privacy, and well-being for the next generation. Clara is also a renowned global speaker and the media contributor, inspiring action and dialogue about the ethical frameworks shaping the future of AI. Now, in this episode, we'll dive into Clara's expertise, her work at the forefront of AI ethics, and her vision for balancing innovation with responsibility. It's a conversation you won't want to miss, so make sure that you're subscribed to Redefining AI and you can catch up with not only this conversation but all others that are accessible across the 4 seasons. Welcome, Clara.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I think there's never been a time for us to have these conversations that is more important than what we're doing now, and I'm glad that you're providing a platform for this. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem. We enjoy being able to provide accessible conversation. Sometimes, though, I mean, you mentioned that it is the time to have the conversation. It seems maybe that there's a lot of conversations that are going on. And one thing that you're certainly advocating is that you're making sure that there is accessible conversation around, as we've mentioned, the ethical component of AI and making sure that we can balance innovation with responsibility. Can you maybe share that path that you've traveled, your path to AI and ethics? You know, what sparked your passion for this intersection of AI, ethics, and education? And how has that shaped your career path that you're on today?
It's a wonderful question. And it actually goes back to my very first master's degree, which was in practical philosophy and applied ethics. And I did my research on Dell Computers, who had at the time established a plant in Ireland and were importing Polish workers to the plant. And rather than working on a plan for social integration for that community, they built a kind of hub outside of the Irish villages where the Polish worker would live, have schools, their shops, and so on. And I thought that this dynamic was really interesting because it was the first case I'd really seen where the production of technology had a social impact. So I was really drawn in there, and I knew that was going to be my pathway forward. Then I think this is the case perhaps for many women, I took some years to get the courage to believe that I could actually figure out how to study computer science. I grew up at a time where it was definitely like a guy's tech. And I think in many parts of the world, it still is. But once I took my first couple of courses, I realized that it really wasn't that hard. And then it was all downhill from there. I just loved studying. I loved how systems work. I love the IT architecture, seeing how to build algorithms and how they work, machine learning and the impact it has on the world. But for me, always under the umbrella of understanding that whatever it is that we're doing and developing, this is going to be a unique social technology, unlike a technology that we've seen before. And so my passion for education, for ethics, and for these advanced technologies really has come together now. And I think it's a perfect time for us to start changing the conversation that we have on advanced technology from the big boys in tech and political conversations to what does the social community think? How do they understand the technology? How is it affecting our children, our families, homes? And that is where my passion area is. So that's what drives the engine every day.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. So there's a couple of things that I've noted down. Practical, at the very start, you spoke about practical philosophy. What is that? What can we understand by that term?
Yeah, it's a good question. So practical philosophy is the idea that what you are studying can be used in some kind of practical way. So a lot of philosophy you could be immersing in theoretical philosophy. So it could be something like you could spend your lifetime really diving into a particular area of epistemology, the study of knowledge, to understand what knowledge is in itself. But much of that is theoretical, and it goes a little bit above the head of most people and seems unimportant in some way, whereas practical philosophy is really about like, how can what we produce here as a sort of understanding of what this meaning is of whatever it might be that you're working with, how can that apply in the real world? How can we actually implement these things that we're understanding to make a difference in the real world? And applied ethics is very much connected to ethics that we see in action today. Could be institutional research boards, it could be ethics oversight boards. We see this very much, of course, in the medical industry, in the university industries, where there's very vibrant ethics community, but we see it in many other fields as well.
What's the challenge in the sort of practical application of philosophy, especially if we want to forefront the whole movement around applied ethics in AI? What are some of the challenges there?
I think two challenges is one is that, often it becomes just talk. A lot of companies will post some kind of an ethical statement that looks good. It fits the sort of fodder, but it doesn't really have teeth. It's not really actually being integrated in a meaningful way. And unfortunately, we see that a lot with a lot of departments that do work in ethics and ethics oversight, that when they really sort of push the throttle down and say, we need to do X, Y, Z, it doesn't really resonate, because it's always rubbing against this idea that it may have an impact on profit. And I think the other big challenge is mandate, to start to build better foundations and oversight, where the people who work with ethics really have the mandate to also to push through some of these decisions that are in the better interest of the company ultimately, but out of the more ethical pathway.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with that particular component and that necessity of being able to rub through that sort of tension of profit, ethical movement forefronting. So your academic background, as you've mentioned, that spans computer science, the philosophical component, philosophy, theology, which is quite a diverse mix in itself. And I think that you've probably recognised that these disciplines have influenced the way that you think about AI and its impact on society. To what extent has it influenced how you think about
that's
it?
That's a good question, because I think that it has really helped me build a holistic understanding of the world. Of course, I know there are many things that I don't know, but having a broad reach in terms of my background has allowed me to look into how technology such as AI impacts the communities in which we live, and allowed me to dive into everything from how the Vatican is using digital technologies and generative AI to super advanced tech conferences where we talk about things in quantum mechanics and quantum computing. And I think it has allowed me to see in a meaningful way the greater impact that this will have on our community. It's sort of, I haven't really hopped into a lot of what they call the hype around, when generative AI first came out, everybody was excited, and understandably so. I was excited too, because it had been a long wait. And when people talk about artificial general intelligence, I also feel that I'm more tempered, because I think the real issues that we have aren't robots coming to annihilate all of us. The real issues is that these technologies have for more than 20 years and will continue to do so impact the way we live together as human beings on this planet, our economics, our political systems, our democracies, and how children are raised in their families, for better and for worse. And we do need to address that as a global community. We can't simply keep ignoring it.
It's really interesting. And I think also as a representative and more of an individual that understands the application of AI in a lot of enterprise settings. So we focus and really explore how it benefits individuals in an enterprise context. Now, what you seem to be looking at is the oversight of the impact it is having on communities. And as you've mentioned, there is a lot of seeds that display evidence of it being used in different ways, like in the Vatican. If it is going to impact us economically, politically, what are you most uncertain about or worried about at the moment? Because there's a lot of beneficial sort of applications, and I'm sure we'll go into that with the focus that you've chose to place in education and how it's used in education. But what are you most concerned about in the moment if you look at the impact from an economical or political perspective?
A very good question. I think that I would say on a global perspective, I'm most concerned about the continued rise of what some people call a sort of AI class. So these would be the people who live in countries that have been able to leverage this technology to continue to drive profit, drive education, drive opportunity, and then an increase of people who are on the other side of what we call the digital divide, who simply are not connected as we speak, no electricity, no internet. And here we're talking billions of people. And many of those people that do not have access to these opportunities will fall increasingly behind. And then the class of people who have, I say class, I know it's a bit of a trigger word, but
yeah, some people are triggered.
Maybe I say this on purpose, will continue to rise. And I think if history is a teacher of things, we know from the past that when you have a small percentage of people who are incredibly wealthy and a large proponent of people who are struggling in deep poverty, that usually doesn't have a positive social and emotional impact on how we live as human beings. And I worry about that also because in many of the disconnected communities, countries, regions, the vast majority of the population are very young and really would be in a perfect situation to leverage this technology to help rise up their nations. But because of the lack of infrastructure, they're not catching up. So I think on a global scale, it's something I'm very concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Just to be a little bit provocative for a moment, a lot of people might argue, well, this is not different if we look at maybe the representation that we've seen in the digital divide. Maybe if we take the example of the Global South, I mean, there's a lot of areas in the Global South that have never had access to, let's say, in an educational setting, any form of technology. They don't sometimes even have internet. In that sense, that divide has existed and still is very much evident. What does it matter if there's now the additional implementation of a lack of access to AI? I mean, surely that's not different than what existed with, as you've spoken about, a digital divide from certain demographical perspectives.
That's a great question. So the reason why I believe that it makes a difference has to do with how AI learns, how it's trained, how it works. So it's important to keep in mind that AI doesn't tell you the truth. So an AI gives you an output based on probabilities. What's most probably the correct answer? So it works simply just on very not simple, but very predictable patterns. So if I go into Google and I do a simple search, something like, what does the landscape look like in Switzerland? I am most probably going to see something that involves mountains. There might be something like rivers and streams, but most probably it's mountains because the AI has a lot of information about Switzerland, but the most information it has when it comes to landscape is around those mountains. And so it will push out an image or text or a search result about mountains. So what that means is that when an AI has data, it will look at the data it has, but it won't look beyond that data. So if it has data that in Switzerland, there are 99 women and 1 man, if I go in and ask, what's the population of Switzerland consist of in terms of biological sex, it will tell me, it consists of women, because although the man is in the data set, it doesn't identify the main man as the most probable answer. So that's very simplified. Of course, we then can build algorithms to train the AI. But the truth is that when you are not connected to internet, when you're not on social media, when you're not on websites, when you don't exist in the digital space, you don't exist in the data set. And it means that the representation of the people who live in the regions that are disconnected, their language, their beliefs, their culture, their desires for their families, for employment, for innovation, that doesn't exist in the data set. So if they go in and access artificial intelligence technology, they're not likely to get a version of answers that correspond with their understanding of reality. They're going to get answers that correspond with the intentions, the desires, and the wants and needs of the people who are online. And those people are mostly located in Europe, North America, larger parts of Asia, and they have different intentions and beliefs. And so it not only makes it more difficult if you do finally connect to actually use the systems in a meaningful way, it also makes it more difficult to figure out how you can use and leverage this technology to drive innovation in your own region. And so they essentially become invisible. And I think that as a major problem. And as a caveat, we do see now that AI is being trained using synthetic data, so data that the AI itself develops, but it essentially falls into the same traps, that it's a data that's biased towards a certain understanding of the world. That's also the case for you and me, Lauren. I just want to interject that as well. If you go in and use something like a large language model, an American large language model, such as OpenAI's model or ChatGPT, Gemini, what you will experience is that you might write or speak to the large language model in the way that you think, the way that you speak. It will then translate your inquiry into American English cognition. It will process what it is that you're saying in American English. Then it will respond, and then it will push it back. Then it will translate it into what it is that you have a preference for. But the base of it is still American English, and the reasoning is built as an American English reasoning. And it's a subtle but important impact.
So does that go back, like if we were to weave a thread back to the start of the conversation, does that go back to the emphasis of the practical philosophy? Is really that does. The impact that tech is having on society, the example that you've given us?
Exactly. It really does, because it's very subtle, some of these things, and we don't really notice it. And that's something we see a lot in schools. You know, teachers are using simple forms of AI, advanced forms of AI, not really realizing that the output is coming out in a particular kind of way. Imagine if you're a teacher in a French school and you have French students and you're using a large language model in French, but in fact, you don't realize that underneath the reasoning of the model lies an American English thinking process rather than a French culture process. It does have an impact in the long run on children's understanding of reality. And it's important that we address that through practical philosophies.
Which is an excellent segue into the last question that I want to ask you. A very important question. So we're talking about AI's role, especially in a child's life and child safety, children's safety. What do you think are the biggest challenges in really creating ethical and responsible AI systems for children? And how can technology, a little bit of a second fold of the question, better protect their privacy and well-being?
I think the biggest challenge has been that the generation of parents that we've just had raise their children through schools, the Gen X parents, were the first generation of parents with advanced technologies. And they were eager to buy it, but had no idea what the social, emotional, technological impact would be. We have a different set of parents now that know how to do things with technology, but still have a lot of learning to do. Our Gen Zs and our millennium parents. And I think the biggest challenge has been that we haven't really understood how to support our parental community in how technology should take place in their child's life, both in school and at home. It's really important that we get families on board with and involved with conversations on how technology should be used in education, not just in their own child's school, but also on a national level. And I think we have work to do there. And I think tech companies have work to do there with really having real impact conversations with parents and make action plans for how technology should be in their children's life going forward.
Do you think that tech companies are evading these conversations?
Yes and no. I think I have seen tech companies do incredible work. There's a lot of resources out there. I think Google is a wonderful example. Actually, TikTok Europe has really good information for parents, Microsoft, but they're missing the mark. It seems as if the information has been made with good intentions, but it's not resonating with parents. Parents are not using it. They're not understanding. It doesn't make sense to them. So I think what tech companies could do to up the game is to really get the parents on board, get them in and use them as a resource and use the children as a resource to get a real view of the ecosystem. Because I definitely experience that what tech company thinks work and what children and parents thinks work are more and more different things. And we need to meet in the middle.
Yeah. It's been absolutely fascinating having you on Redefining AI, Clara. Thank you for your input, your thoughts, and I'm sure that our listeners have thoroughly enjoyed being with us today as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It was nice speaking with you.